All right, this will be part one of our lecture series on the urinary system. The urinary system you'll also hear referred to as the renal system or the urinary tract. Its functions are to filter the blood, to remove metabolic waste. It does this through creation and excretion of urine. It's also going to regulate our water volume and the pH levels in the body. We talked about with our respiratory lecture, we talked a little bit about how important those pH levels can be and how the respiratory system helps to regulate those. The kidneys regulate that as well, so we'll talk more about that. And then lastly, the kidneys help to regulate our blood pressure and our red blood cell counts. We're going to talk about a few major different structures in the urinary system. We're going to talk about our kidneys, our ureters, our bladder, and our urethra. Okay, so first things first. The kidneys are going to be little bean-shaped organs that are going to be on either side of our spine. They sit against the posterior wall behind the abdominal cavity organs. You'll hear this referred to as retroperitoneal whenever you start getting deeper into medicine. They're going to filter out waste, excess nutrients, and excess water from the entirety of your blood. This is going to be about 5 to 6 liters. They're going to do this about 40 times every single day. And this is going to produce about 1.5 to 2 liters of urine per day. A kidney can hold about 20% of your blood volume at a time. And again, remember, a big takeaway here, remember that while it's doing this process, it's helping to regulate that pH, it's helping to regulate that water volume in the blood, and it's helping to control the blood pressure and the RBC production. It does this because our kidneys secrete a hormone known as erythropoietin, which stimulates the red bone marrow to make more red blood cells. If you ever end up working in medicine, there's a synthetic version of this that we inject people with in nephrology. It's called Procrit. So if you ever see that medication, that's just the synthetic form of this hormone. So let's talk a little bit about the anatomy of the kidneys. The kidneys are going to consist of different regions, which are going to work together to filter the blood and then excrete that waste. So first we'll talk about the renal cortex. The renal cortex is going to be the outer layer, and we looked at this in lab last week. This is going to contain the arteries and the veins that are going to enter and exit the kidney. So this is what's actually carrying the blood into the kidney. We also have the renal medulla. This is going to be our middle layer. It is going to contain 7 to 18 of these renal pyramids, and the renal pyramids are going to be distinct segments within the medulla, and we also looked at those last week in lab. So the renal arteries, let's talk just a little bit about the vasculature here and how this works. The renal arteries are going to bring unfiltered blood to the kidneys and connect to the aorta. The renal veins are going to remove filtered blood from the kidneys and return it to the body. So these are going to connect to the inferior vena cava. And then the renal pelvis is going to be a funnel-shaped section of each ureter. And this is going to funnel the urine from the kidney into the ureter so we can start moving that down into the bladder and out of the system. So this is just a picture with just the blood vessel parts of the kidneys. So if you look at this with all the other tissue removed, you can absolutely see how incredibly vascularized the kidneys are, and that is why they are able to do this job of blood filtration so well. Here's another picture I put in here for you all, just so that you can see an illustration side by side with a real kidney and see what those structures actually look like in real life, and they're both labeled out for you. I just put that in here to help with your studying. So let's talk about the ureters. These are just going to be tubes of smooth muscle, which are going to exit the kidneys, and then they're going to carry that urine all the way to the bladder. These can become blocked or infected. This is what happens when we have a kidney infection, is we end up with these blocked, and sometimes we can end up with urine backup and all kinds of bad stuff. You don't want urine backing up into your kidneys. That's a bad deal. So then after we get through the ureters, we're going to move down to the bladder. This is going to be a hollow muscular organ, which is going to store urine to be excreted. Sorry, I got tongue-tied there. It can hold about 500 mils, sometimes a little more than that. but typically about 2 cups is the amount of urine that your bladder can hold at a time. The inner layer of this is going to be made of transitional epithelium. I'm hoping that you remember this from some of our very first lectures. Do you remember the epithelium that we looked at that looks like little tiny umbrellas all side by side in the epithelium? And the reason it's shaped like that is because it allows that tissue to expand and contract. That's what we're talking about here. I'm hoping that you remember that. So there's also going to be a smooth muscle layer that's going to then go around the transitional epithelium that is going to contract to be able to expel that urine. So then we're going to get down into the urethra. This is going to be the tube that actually moves the urine from the bladder to the outside of the body by urination. So urination is going to be controlled by the pons in the brainstem, which is not fully developed in little kids. This is why potty training can be really difficult if you do it in really, really little kids versus when they get just a tiny bit older, because you have to wait on that brainstem development to get to where it needs to be for them to be able to really potty train well. Here is just another visual for you all. These are the structures of the urinary system that are falsely colored on a radiograph. So you can see, again, you can see those ureters, you can see everything moving up into the kidneys, and then you can see all the way down into the bladder. So let's talk a little bit about how the kidneys filter blood, and this will be the last piece that we're going to talk about in lecture 1. So in healthy kidneys, about every 30 minutes, the kidneys are going to filter all of the blood in the body. The first step in this is going to be, so from the artery, blood is going to flow into the kidneys, and it's going to pass through millions of tiny filtering units called glomeruli, and we'll talk more about that. Glomeruli can tell the difference between something you need and something you do not need. So they're going to filter out that waste and that extra fluid from the blood to make urine. After this, we have these little tubes called ureters. These are going to carry the urine to the bladder, and then the urine is going to be removed when you urinate, obviously. Then that clean filtered blood is going to go into the veins and back out into circulation. So that is just a really simplified basic view of how this happens. So let's talk about nephrons. Nephrons are going to be the basic functional unit of the kidney. This is going to be where the blood is actually being filtered at like the microscopic level and where the urine is being formed. So nephrons are going to filter out smaller waste products and excess water from the blood to form urine. You have about roughly 1 million nephrons per kidney. So there's a whole lot of these little guys in there. And I gave you kind of a cutaway section. This is obviously, they're way smaller than this, but I wanted you to see kind of how they're situated in the kidney. And we will talk more about what these specific areas of the nephron are. You can see there's a lot of tubes, and we go up and we go down, and then we go way up and way down, kind of like a little roller coaster. So we're going to talk about each of those sections. They all have a really important part in this filtration process, but I just wanted to zoom in and show you all how they're organized. Here is another picture of this, again, just to help with your studying. This is almost exactly what you saw in lab on the little cross section that we had. I think it was activity 2, maybe. Anyway, so nephrons are going to filter the blood, and they're going to form a substance known as filtrate. As the filtrate passes through the nephron, it is going to reabsorb useful materials from the filtrate before eliminating the remainder as urine. So as things move through these nephrons, they are reabsorbing things, they're excreting things, reabsorbing, excreting, until they get just exactly the right mixture that they want to have. So filtration is going to occur in different stages. So we have first what's called glomerular filtration. You'll also hear this referred to as ultrafiltration. Blood is going to be filtered from the glomerulus at the Bowman's capsule to form the filtrate. So this is this very first little area that we get to that almost, it's like a little capillary ball, and then you see that it's like encapsulated. Next, we'll have selective reabsorption. You'll also hear this referred to as tubular reabsorption. So usable materials are going to be reabsorbed in the convoluted tubules, both in the proximal convoluted tubule and the distal convoluted tubule. Then you're going to have the process of osmoregulation. So in the loop of Henle, this little loop, its purpose is to establish the salt gradient. So it's going to decide how much sodium we hold on to or let go of. And then because water always follows salt, by establishing that salt gradient, we're also going to draw water out of the collecting duct, depending on how much water we're wanting to remove or add into the system. Lastly, excretion is going to be when we take that remaining filtrate, which is now urine, and it's going to be sent via the collecting ducts to the renal calyces and the renal pelvis, and then again, that's the stuff that eventually gets moved all the way out of the kidneys. And then I gave you a little diagram that shows this a few different ways to hopefully help you just be able to visualize it later. This is all that I have for lecture 1. In lecture 2, we're going to talk a little bit more about how the kidneys help to maintain that pH and water balance, and some of the disease processes and illnesses and stuff that you can have with the urinary system.